Welcome everybody to Knitting 102. That's Darren, your teacher there on screen. My name is Claire. I'll be hanging out with you in the Zoom chat. I can answer any questions you have there during the course of class. If you've got those, just pop them in the chat and I can forward them on to Darren so he can demonstrate as needed as well. If you did not receive the handout for this class, I'll be putting it in the chat a few times over the course of class as well. So you can make sure you have that all on hand and ready to follow along. And now that all of that is out of the way, I think we are ready to turn it over to Darren.
Great. Welcome to class. Today, we are going to be learning how to do the purl stitch. And then once we learn how to do the purl stitch, that's going to give us an opportunity to learn how to make many different types of textures and different types of fabrics that you'll be able to incorporate into your knitting. Today, we're going to, after we learn the purl stitch, we're going to learn about garter stitch, stockinette stitch, and we're going to learn about ribbing. So you'll be able to do 3 different types of fabrics by the end of class. And at the end of class, I'm going to review the pattern to make this hat. So everything we learned today, you'll be able to put right into practical use and make something that's very, very handy and nice to have. Hats are really fun to make. They work up fast. They make great gifts. Everybody likes a hat. Everybody needs, you can make whatever color is best suited for you or your friends. Last week, if you took the class last week, we learned how to make this cowl. So it does work up to be a nice set, and it's like 28 degrees in New York City today. So this would be a very welcome addition to your outfit. It's cold. And then next week, we're going to review the pattern and learn all the skills you need to make these mittens. So you have a complete set that you'll be able to use. And I realized that the mittens, from where you're sitting right now, the mittens look very, very hard. But you look at the hat, you can see that the hat and the mittens are basically the same shape. So everything you learned for the hat, you'll be using on the mittens. And then what we're learning in class will teach you how to make this thumb and how to make the little taper on the top to make it into a point. So by the time you get there next week, it won't look so hard. So don't panic yet. So let's go ahead and switch the view to the view of my hands, and we'll go ahead and get started with the learning. So today I'm using, for demonstrations, I'm using Hometown yarn. The color I'm using is San Diego Navy. It's a very nice thick yarn, and it comes in a wide variety of colors, so it's a lot of fun to work with. And so here's what the label looks like. Hometown Bonus Bundle is available on lionbrand.com and also on michaels.com. And so you can go there and look at all the great colors, pick whichever one you like, and then you'll be ready to go. So just a quick review. This is a size 6. So yarn is categorized from a 1 up to a 7, 7 being the largest. So this is a 6, which is pretty large. It does offer a recommendation of a needle size. It's recommending a 13 or a 9mm. So you always kind of want to double check this when you're starting. If you can go up or down one size, it's usually not a huge problem. So any questions about the yarn or anything so far? How are we doing? We doing good?
Doing good.
So all I did to just prepare for class was I knitted a few rows. This is just garter stitch. I just cast on and I just knit every stitch on every row for about 5 or 6 rows, just to give me a base to work into. Just so I could go ahead and get started. You didn't want to watch me cast on and do all that. So, righty. So the purl stitch. So how was the, I'm struggling with my lighting. So I'm trying to get a good lighting setup. Okay. So let's look at the knit stitch first, and then I'll contrast that with the purl stitch. So the knit stitch, You're holding your yarn in the back of your work, and you're entering the stitch this direction, wrapping your yarn, and then the motion is you're kind of pulling it through, okay? So the purl stitch is almost the exact opposite. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reposition our yarn to the front of our work, and that's a major difference. So with the purl stitch, you're going to position your yarn to the front of your work. And you're going to enter the stitch in a different way as well. You're going to kind of dive into it this direction. Okay? So with knitting, you enter it here. But with purling, we're going to be diving into the stitch this direction. So you enter the stitch. We're going to wrap the yarn the same way we do with knitting, counterclockwise. And then with this motion, we're kind of pushing that loop back through. So it's more like a pushing motion this time. And then we pop that stitch right off and we have a knit stitch. I'm sorry, a purl stitch ready to go. Let me do a couple more. You dive into the stitch from above. So you kind of enter the stitch from above that direction. Make an X. Wrap your yarn counterclockwise the same way you do when you're knitting. And then you're kind of pushing that loop back through. It's more of a pushing motion. And then you transfer it over to the right hand needle. Okay. And this is kind of how it looks when I do it normally. Also, can do it if you hold the yarn in your right hand. It's the same thing. You dive into the stitch, wrap the yarn, push it through, transfer it over. Enter the stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's a little rhyme you can say to yourself. You go under the fence, grab a sheep, back we go, and off we leap. So that's one little rhyme. Or Jack goes under, puts on a scarf, goes back outside, then jumps off. So a couple of little rhymes to help you remember if you want. So what questions, I'm going to stop and rest right here for a second. Claire, what questions do we have? And are people getting stuck on a certain spot? Is there a certain thing I can try to make more clear? How are we doing?
Well, I think if people had wanted to follow along, we sort of skipped how many stitches they might want to have on their needle. So I just suggested that if you want to practice with us in class, cast on like 10 to 15 stitches and knit a row and then switch to the purl. So you don't have to have as much fabric done as Darren does there.
No, I think I have about 15 stitches on here. And so if you're just practicing, it doesn't really matter how many stitches you have on for now. You do want to know how many you have and try to maintain that same amount of stitches so that you know if you're not losing a stitch or gaining a stitch, which sometimes happens when we're learning, and that's very common. Any other questions? I can go over anything specifically or demonstrate more clearly.
Going back to if they're just casting on, someone wants to know how they would cast on a purl stitch. She says they're left-handed specifically, but
I don't think there's a specific purl stitch cast on, is there, Claire? I mean, you just cast on however you like to cast on and then go. Wouldn't that be correct?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Yep. And if you're left-handed or right-handed, it doesn't matter because it's a two-handed activity. So you use both hands. I'm wrapping with my right hand right now, but when I'm kind of ambidextrous. So, but when I knit, this is how I knit. I wrap with my left hand. But my right hand is still doing a lot of activity. So no matter how you're doing it, left-handed or right-handed, I think we're all going to be okay. Then when you get to the end of the row, you just purl that stitch the same way that you purled the other stitches. And now all of my stitches are on my right hand side. My left hand needle is empty. And then you just switch and Now, all of my stitches are on my left-hand side. My right-hand side is empty, and then you just start again. So starting the row, because the last time I started with the knit stitch, just for demonstrating. So for starting the row with the purl, you take your working yarn and you gently just move it to the front. You don't want to pull it tight and scrunch everything up. You just gently position it to the front. Just gently lay it across. And then when you dive into the stitch, it's right there for you to wrap. And then you push it through. Whoops, or it slips off your needle and you have to go again. Push it through. Okay. How are we doing? Any questions?
We do have a question about how exactly you're wrapping the yarn around the needle before you push it through.
Okay. So we enter the stitch, and you can rest here for just a second and make an X. So make an X like this. Hold everything in either your right or left hand, so that way your other hand is available. And if you look at this, and this is, if you picture this as a clock, so it's 3 o'clock. If you hold your yarn at the 3, 3, 2, 1, blast off, and it goes around. So 3, 2, 1, blast off, and then it wraps around that direction. So it's wrapping counterclockwise. And you might want to say you're going to go around the back and then back to the front, or you're going to take it to the left, going behind, and then a sharp turn back to the right. So however that makes sense to you, but we do want to make sure we're wrapping it in this direction. So it's kind of going under the needle and coming off this direction. Does that help? Is that clear?
Yes, I think that helps to clarify it for some of the people.
And it is very important that you do wrap your yarn in the correct way. You have to enter the stitch in the correct way, and you have to wrap your yarn the correct way. Otherwise, your stitches will be twisted, and that's not the end of the world, but it does make a different texture. It does make your work tighter. It makes it harder to knit or purl into those stitches if they're twisted. So, and then when you want to do more advanced work later on, you're gonna run into problems there. So, if you get in a good habit of doing it correctly now, when I first learned to knit, I was wrapping my yarn the wrong way for 2 years, and it was fine, but it was hard then to change to the correct way. Any other questions?
We do have one, and I'm not sure if we're ready to get to this quite yet, but we do have a student who has noticed that, is this stitch supposed to look different? It looks the same as the knit stitches they already have on their needle.
Oh my goodness. Somebody figured us out, Claire. They figured us out. So let's talk a little bit then. We can go right into that. That's about the next thing that I do want to talk about is the knit stitch and the purl stitch. So I have some swatches here we're going to look at. So when you're knitting garter stitch, which is what we're knitting right now, or purling right now. I use the word knit when I'm just talking about knitting or purling sometimes. So, but garter stitch, you create garter stitch by knitting or purling every stitch on every row. So you knit a whole row, you turn your work, and then you knit across, turn your work, knit again. Or if you're purling, you purl all the way across, turn your work, purl all the way across. You're going to get the exact same fabric. Now, let me explain why. So there is this, I call it the secret life of the knit stitch. So the knit stitch has a secret life. It has a secret that we're going to talk about. The knit stitch and the purl stitch are the exact same stitch. So that's the secret. The thing that makes them different and why it's important to learn to do both is because one is the front and one is the back. Now, we're never sure which one's really the front or the back, but the knit stitch is usually the one that is on the outside of your garment. So usually the knit side is considered the front. And I'm going to show you a knit stitch right here. And we're going to start to learn how to tell the difference. And then I'm going to work this into some other fabrics for you. So a knit stitch, I've isolated this one stitch right here. You can see it is shaped like a V. So this right here is a knit stitch, and it's shaped like a V. And you're going to hear a lot about either V's or bumps. And that's going to be descriptions people use of the knits and the purls. So when people are talking about the V's, you want to look here. And if you look at this fabric, all of these stitches are shaped like V's on this piece of fabric I have here. They're all shaped like V's. So what that's telling me is that all of these stitches are knit stitches. So they're all knit stitches on this fabric until I turn it over. And now when I turn it over, it looks completely different, right? And if you look at the inside of your sweaters, probably most of the inside of your sweaters or your stocking caps look like this. They'll look very similar to this type of fabric. So these are purl stitches. And purl stitches, they kind of create these horizontal lines that go across. You kind of get these bumps that go this way and then this way. It's kind of like a wavy line that goes across. So that's what a purl stitch looks like when it's worked into a large field of purl stitches. And this is what a knit stitch looks like. So it's the same fabric, they're the same stitches. This here's a knit stitch. And then right on the back is the back of that stitch, which is the purl stitch. That is, when I learned to knit, I taught myself how to knit, and I did not understand this, and I was very, very confused. So let's look at garter stitch. So if you create garter stitch by knitting every stitch on every row, when you turn your work, so you're knitting on one side, and when you turn your work, now those stitches you just knitted are actually purl stitches on the back side of your work, which can be a little confusing. So I'm going to pull this fabric apart. I'm going to stretch it a little bit. And I have knit stitches right here. So right there is a knit stitch. So right there in between. So I've got all knit stitches in this whole row. And then I've got these purl stitches, these purl bumps, and this is where it's called a purl bump or a purl ridge, because it kind of makes these ridges. And if you just have one purl stitch by itself, it makes a bump. So this is using knits and purls. I have all of my purl stitches in one row, all of my knit stitches in the other row, and it creates this very nice fabric called garter stitch, which is reversible. It's the same on both sides. The nice thing about garter stitch is it lays flat and it's kind of spongy and easy to work with. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to create this stitch, which is called stockinette stitch. And we'll be arranging our knits and purls in a little different way. We'll put all of our knits on one side and all of our purls on the other side. Now, the interesting thing is about these two swatches is I have the same number of stitches and the same number of rows. And just because I'm using knits and purls in a different way, it creates a different shape of fabric. So if you stretch this up, you can see it's the same shape, but because of the nature of garter stitch, it actually kind of scrunches down a little bit. So using the same number of rows, you don't get the same number of inches in your fabric, but this fabric is going to feel a little thicker because it's kind of scrunching down. And this one, so here's the hard lesson you have to learn about stockinette stitch, is it always rolls up. It always rolls up in a little curl like that. Sometimes it'll roll this way. And if you have a big enough piece of fabric, it'll roll both ways, like all four ways at the same time. So garter stitch naturally curls like this. Some of my students would say, I've knit a scarf, it's curling up. There's something wrong with this yarn. Like, what's wrong with this yarn? But there's nothing wrong with the yarn. It's just the selection of your stitch. So garter stitch always rolls. And that's why usually when you have, I'm sorry, stockinette stitch. This is stockinette stitch always rolls. And that's why usually when you have big areas of stockinette stitch, like on this mitten, you'll have ribbing on the edge and the ribbing will keep it from rolling. Okay, so are we ready? That's probably a lot of information right up front. Are we ready to learn how to do stockinette stitch? And then we can talk more about the nature of the fabrics as we go. Any pressing questions right here? Are we ready to push forward?
I think we are ready to go ahead.
Okay. And as you have questions, let me know. Don't hesitate. All right. So I've already started part of this row doing purls, but I'm going to switch mid-row and we're going to do stockinette stitch. Now on this row, back on this side, I have purl stitches. So I created these stitches by creating purl stitches. And if I look on the other side, those same stitches, just like magic, turn into knit stitches. So here, I'll isolate this one, and that one is the V shape. Right there. And if you look at the other side, you can see these bumps, and these are the purl bumps, okay? And it's very important that you learn to tell the difference. So on your needle, a purl is going to look like this little bump or this little ridge, and it's going to be bumped clear up against your needle. So it's pressing up against the needle. And it has more texture. It feels like little bumps or ridges. And the knit stitch, when you're looking at a knit stitch, basically the knit stitch, here's your stitch, it's not even touching the needle. It's like it's hanging below the needle. So you've got this loop on your needle and then the knit stitch is kind of hanging below the needle. It's longer, it's a long stitch, whereas the purl bump was just right here and it's shaped like a V. So that's one of the most important distinguishing factors is you're going to see this V shape. Okay, so that's how you tell the difference between a knit and a purl. So if I'm going to create stockinette stitch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit all of my knits and purl all of my purls. Okay, so if I'm looking at these stitches and I've identified them correctly as knit stitches, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit them. Yep.
Can you angle the light towards your hands a little bit when you have it positioned like you're going to knit? The fabric gets very dark.
Is that better?
I think that's a little better. Yes, thank you.
So I've identified these as knit stitches. So to create stockinette stitch, I'm going to knit stitches and purl stitches. So I'm going to just knit all the way across, just like normal, just like you always do. And as you do this, you'll start to see a different shape in your fabric starting to take place. So you can kind of see here, it's already starting to look different. Okay, knit the last stitch. Now when I turn my work, I know I made knit stitches because I was just knitting, but when I turn my work, just like magic, those stitches have now turned into purl stitches. So for creating stockinette stitch, I need to purl the purl stitches. So I'm just going to purl them all the way across. Okay, so are there any, as I'm purling across, I want to know, are there any questions? Is there any particular spot in the purl stitch where people are getting hung up? Any questions about how to identify a knit or a purl? Anything at all?
I think okay, yes, someone wants to see exactly how to do the purl stitch again.
Okay, So I'm doing purl stitches now. So let me see if I can get a good angle here on the light. So you dive into the stitch this direction. So you enter the stitch from above. And then you wrap your yarn counterclockwise. So if you hold it here where the go 3, 2, 1, blast off. So you're wrapping it around that right-hand needle from the back, then across to the front. And then you're kind of pushing that loop through, transfer it over. Okay. So you dive into the stitch, wrap the yarn counterclockwise, push it back through, transfer it over. Okay. Is there a specific step that is the kind of the sticking point? So dive in, wrap your yarn, bring it across, transfer it over. There's 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Under the
At
fence.
least the way I think of working into this stitch, and maybe this explanation will help some other people too. So in my head, I picture it as for the knit stitch, you are entering the stitch from left going to the right. So then like that, yep. So then for the purl stitch, you're entering from the right going to the left. And that helps me keep the how to enter the stitch straight.
Okay, so you're entering it from the right. So here's my right, going towards the left. There.
And then when I think about wrapping the yarn around the needle, for me, if I'm looking at the needle and I hold mine maybe a little bit more horizontal than Darren does.
Like what,
And
like
so
that?
for me, yeah.
More like that, okay.
So for me, I picture wrapping the yarn over the top of the needle and around to the back again.
Yeah. There's so many different ways of looking at it. But once you practice and kind of get it, you'll kind of figure out how it makes sense to you. So entering the stitch from the right to the left. So you're pointing it to the left, or you're entering it from the top, going for the bottom, kind of diving into it that way. And then wrapping the yarn this direction. So if you bring your yarn to the middle between the 2 needles and then take it to the left. And then we're kind of pushing it back through and then transfer it over. Does that help? Hopefully that helps.
Hooray, yes, we have a confirmation.
Good. And it can be a very complicated thing for some reason when you don't understand it and when you're trying to learn it. Some people really do struggle. So if you find yourself being one of those people that are struggling with it, don't give up right away. Keep practicing, because all of a sudden it's going to click in your brain exactly how to do it, and you're going to do it and it's going to be fine. But some people do struggle a little bit. Nobody wants to be that person, but we just have to be patient with ourselves and realize we are learning something new, and give yourself some time. So I've been putting all of my purl stitches on one side and all of my knit stitches on the other side. And it's created this different fabric, which is called stockinette stitch. So here's garter stitch down here. You can see how that looks. And then stockinette stitch is here. And it's a much smoother fabric. Any questions on how I created either of those fabrics? Doing okay? We ready to see
Doing okay.
when I see ribbing, how to make, is that too crazy to try to learn how to do ribbing now?
I think we better get to that since we're about halfway through class.
Okay, so with ribbing, we're still just working with knits and purls. So even though we're going to be doing it in a different way, still just knits and purls, okay? So I'm going to start off with 2 knits. Okay, 2 knits, come to a full stop, open your needles, and then the yarn has to be passed between the needles. It has to come in between the needles. And now that it's in the front, I'm ready to do as many purl stitches as I want to. So I'm going to do 2 purl stitches. Two purl stitches, come to a full stop, open up your needles. It has to pass in between the needles. So if you think about like a football game, or I guess soccer, if this is your goalpost and you want to score an extra point or whatever, however it works, you have to go in between. So if you go this way, then you don't get a point. If you go this way, it doesn't go in between, you don't get your point. So it has to go in between. And then once you're in the correct position, you can knit as many stitches as you want. Full stop, open your needles, bring it to the front. And now I'm ready to do purls. Now let me show you what can happen if you're not paying attention. Okay. So I did my 2 purls, now I'm going to do 2 knits. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the stitch for my knit. But what did I forgot to position my yarn, right? So I forgot to position my yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and position it now, which is a mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and position it now, wrap my yarn. I'm going to get ready to pull it through, but I want you to see what happens. When I position it now, what happens is this yarn is getting wrapped over my needle, and I'm wrapping my yarn around my needle now correctly, but this loop here is going to become a stitch by mistake. So it's also going to create a hole because it's not connected to anything underneath. Now, later on, that is a stitch that you might actually use, and it's called a yarn over. But when you don't want one, it's going to be very upsetting. So it's very important as you're doing ribbing that I did my 2 purl stitches. I have to come to a full stop, open my needles, reposition. But if you start your stitch and realize your yarn's in the wrong place, you have to back out of the stitch, open your needles, reposition. And then that way you won't make a mistake. Do my 2 knits. I'm going to do my purl. Oops, wait a minute. I didn't position my yarn. Stop everything. Open my needles. Reposition. Ready to go. Any questions?
So you're doing a knit 2, purl 2 rib. Is that the only type of ribbing that you can do?
There are, I do recommend practicing with knit 2, purl 2 rib. I think it's a nice practice rib, but once you get comfortable with doing ribbing and repositioning your yarn, you can do any combinations that you want. Usually ribbing is fairly balanced and symmetrical, where you normally will see like knit 2, purl 2, or knit 1, purl 1, knit 3, purl 3. It's usually kind of like that, but not always. It could be any combination of stitches. You could do knit 2, purl 1, knit 2, purl 3. It could be any combination. You could do knit 2, have a little cable, purl 2, have a little cable. So it could be any number. So now that I'm working back across and I wasn't paying attention, I almost made a mistake. You want to make sure when you're making ribbing, that you're always stacking your knit stitches on top of knit stitches and your purl stitches on top of purl stitches. And that's going to give you the columns of ribbing. So this is where it becomes very important that you can tell what a stitch looks like and you can identify the stitch correctly. So these two stitches right here, they're bumped up tight against the needle. They kind of form this little bump. They're not shaped like a V, and they're kind of very short, and they kind of make bumps or textures. So that's why we can identify those as purl stitches, because you can kind of see there how they kind of make a bump. So I'm going to bring my yarn to the front and I'm going to purl them. And after I purl them, if I wasn't sure, let's just say, oh, I wasn't sure, I'm going to look at those two stitches that I just purled, and I'm going to look down at the stitches below them, and they all look the same. So I must be right. They're matching up really well. And if I'm still not sure, turn your work and look at the front. So these are the two stitches I just purled. I turned my work, so now, just like magic, they turn into knit stitches. And look at your column of your ribbing, and you can see all of the stitches look the same. I've got my knit stitch here shaped like a V. There, and they're stacked up on top of each other and they look very nice. So you can kind of rule it out by process of elimination, but just kind of double check it. And then these next two, these look like, so there's a purl bump down here, but up here there's not. And it looks like these must be knit stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and knit them. And then again, these are purl stitches because you can see the bumps. Any questions about how to tell the difference or how to identify them? It's very important that you learn how to do that correctly, and it can be confusing. And another thing I want you to think about as you're knitting or purling, I just created all of these stitches. I just finished this row. It looks pretty good. You have to remember though, as I'm working on this side of the fabric, you're also creating stitches and putting stitches on the other side. So whatever you do on this side, something's going to be happening on this side. So if I'm putting a knit stitch here, I'm creating a purl stitch on the back. If I create a purl stitch here, I'm creating a knit stitch on the back. So you just remember, you're actually working on both sides of the fabric at the same time. Turn my work, and then we can look and see how it's looking. So here's my garter stitch on the very bottom, garter stitch, my stockinette stitch here in the middle where it looks very smooth. And you can see my ribbing is starting to come into shape. Here are my two purls and my two knits. And then two purls and two knits here. And then this is what it looks like kind of in a project. So this is the hat we're going to learn how to make. And I've got two knits and then two purls, two knits, two purls, two knits, two purls. And you can see it kind of, you kind of let it rest and relax, it kind of squishes in a little bit. And then this is stockinette stitch here. We don't have any garter stitch on this hat, but garter stitch was used, or you can, if you made this is garter stitch that creates this cowl. So 3 types of fabric that you should be able to make with practice. It does take practice. You're not going to be able to, don't quit your job and start the Etsy store quite yet, because you do need to practice a little bit. So any questions at all on anything we've covered so far?
We did have a question on how to review how to make stockinette stitch fabric.
Okay, so stockinette stitch is created by when you're looking, let me get this up here. I cast on, and then I did a row of knit stitches here. And then when you turn your work on this side, you're going to do a row of purl stitches all the way across. Purl stitches on one side, turn your work, and put knit stitches on the other side. So you're lining up all of your knit stitches on one side, all of your purl stitches on the other side. And the little tip you might want to do is, as you're learning, when you cast on and you knit that first row, you can put a safety pin or a stitch marker or something on that side, because those are the knit stitches. You just knit them, you know they're knit stitches, put a safety pin. Turn your work, purl all the way across, turn back to the other side. I see my safety pin, I know that is the knit side. So knit all the way across, no safety pin, we're gonna purl. So that's what I did when I was first learning to help me remember. But you really want to get familiar with being able to identify the knits and the purls, because it's going to make your knitting career much easier and happier.
All right, that was a good explanation.
Okay. Sometimes I do a lot of talking, and I'm not sure if it actually comes together and makes sense, you know.
I think the hat might use these terms. We've got a question about what's the difference between wrong side and right side.
So the right side is the side that is going to be on the outside, or the public side. Sometimes you'll hear it called. The wrong side is then the inside. So if your hat is inside out, then this is the wrong side. But sometimes, you know, just because it's the purl side doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong side. Sometimes I've had sweaters with the purl side facing, and that was actually the right side. This hat has a very, you have a seam right here, and you usually wouldn't want the seam facing on the outside. So that's really how you can identify this as the wrong side, because there is that seam. So the wrong side is like if you have if you're going to put on your t-shirt and you put it on inside out with the tags on the outside and the seams on the outside, that's the wrong side. And then the right side, and then you put it on correctly. So does that help? Any questions?
And usually your pattern will specify like which row is a right side row or a wrong side row, at least for the first couple ones.
Yes, and that is another opportunity where you can put like a safety pin, like identify the right side or the wrong side, whichever one you want to be the marked side, put a safety pin on that side, and then you always know for sure whether you're on the right side or the wrong side. That can really sometimes be beneficial. Any other questions?
We've got a question on seaming, so I think it's time to move on to the hat pattern.
Okay, all right. So we've discussed our 3 types of fabric. Okay. These over here. So for the hat pattern, so the hat pattern, it is a free pattern by Lion Brand Yarn. If you don't have a copy of it, you can download it. So it is called the Lion Brand Heartland Thick and Quick Knitting 2 Hat, or you can type in this number and bring it up. It's an easy pattern. The hat size is 19 inches, and hats do stretch. So here's something I want to point out. Materials. It calls for Heartland Thick and Quick, which is a different yarn than what we're actually using. We're using Hometown yarn, but Heartland is actually a number 5 yarn. It's not even a number 6, but I know Heartland yarn Thick and Quick very well, and it is very thick for a number 5. It's almost a 6. So we can pretty much substitute those, and it works out fine. So I like to do this kind of thing when I'm teaching classes because I want my students to get in the habit of changing the patterns to suit your needs. Go ahead, don't feel like you can't make substitutions. You know, it's your hat, it's your knitting. As long as you understand how what the differences in the yarn are, you can make good decisions. You wouldn't want to use like a number 3 yarn or a sock yarn or something. You're just going to run into all kinds of problems. But if the yarns are very similar, you can make changes. Gauge, all gauge means is that if your stitches are the same size as the designer stitches, then your hat will be the same size. And for hats, we don't really worry about gauge so much. But if the hat is super big, then your gauge is loose and you just go down a needle size or 2. That's all you do to worry about that. Hat, so we're going to make the hat. We're going to cast on 50 stitches. And that's easy enough. We know how to cast on. Row 1, there's an asterisk right there at the beginning. So that means that we're going to be doing something special. And it usually means that we're going to be repeating. So keep that in mind. We're going to knit 2, purl 2, repeat from the asterisk to the last 2 stitches, ending with knit 2. So you're going to be knit 2, purl 2 all the way across. And when you get to the very end, you're going to end that row with knit 2. Row 2, again, starting with that asterisk. So we're going to purl 2 and knit 2. We're going to repeat from the asterisk to the last 2 stitches, ending with a purl 2. So what this is doing is this is creating ribbing for us. So you want to make sure that as you're doing this, you don't want to just blindly do it. You want to actually look at your stitches and make sure that you're knitting into knit stitches and purling into purl stitches. Because it's easy to get off count. It's, maybe you get off track. Now look at the stitches and make a decision about, is that a knit? Is that a purl? And then, do the right thing, because it's really easy to get off track. You're going to repeat rows 1 and 2 until the piece measures about 2 inches from the cast on edge. Now, when it says from the cast on edge, it really means that. So you're going to measure it right from that very edge, and it's going to be 2 inches. Okay, so it's 2 inches from the cast. The next row you're going to knit, and then the next row you're going to purl. Now that sounds a lot like stockinette stitch, right? I'm going to knit 1 whole row, and then I'm going to purl 1 whole row. It says work in stockinette stitch, knit 1 row and purl 1 row until the hat measures about 9 inches from the cast on edge. And so again, you're measuring from the very edge of the cast on up into the top of the hat. And if yours is 9.5 or 8.5 or 10, it's fine. It's not going to be the end of the world. You're going to cut your yarn, leaving a 20-inch long tail. You're going to thread that tail through all the stitches on the knitting needle and pull together tightly. So the one thing I want you to notice, it does not tell you to bind off. So you're not binding off, which, I don't really enjoy binding off anyway. So here is what you're going to end up with when you get to this point. So I've got my hat knitted. I've got my ribbing on the bottom. I'm looking at the purl side, so I'm looking at the wrong side. And it's just like a rectangle. It's just like a big rectangle. And you can see my stockinette stitch is trying to curl in, but the ribbing is kind of trying to hold it straight. And that's what we're looking at. And so here is the knit side, okay? So I've cut my yarn and I left a very long tail. We're going to use this tail also for seaming. So that's why it's having you do such a long tail. And you need to get a large-eyed blunt needle. The eye should be large enough to put yarn through, and then the needle should be blunt because we're going between the strands of yarn, we're not piercing them. And if your yarn's frayed out like mine was, you can wrap it with a piece of paper, and that makes it very easy to thread the needle, just like a shoelace, right? So I learned that trick from my mother. To pass that on, that can be very helpful. And then all you're doing at this point is you're going to take this needle and you're going to, you can do one at a time, you can do two at a time, but you're transferring the stitches from your knitting needle to the darning needle. And then once you get so many, you can just push them down onto the yarn. You don't try to keep them all on the needle, but you want to make sure though, you can't lose any, you can't drop one, because if a stitch falls off and you don't realize it, you'll get your hat will run. You'll get like a run in your hat and it won't look so nice. Okay, so you just make sure each one is on the needle and it's going to be pulled down onto that yarn. Any questions at all about the pattern, what I'm doing now? Any questions? It's going to take me a minute to do this. You can see I'm just doing them one at a time, taking my time.
We did have a sort of unrelated question earlier in class. Someone wanted to know where the word purl came from, like P-U-R-L.
I don't know where that came from, but I always think that maybe when people were knitting and purling and they were using probably just wool from a sheep, white wool or, very pale wool, those little bumps that look like little bumps, maybe they looked like little pearls to those people. Maybe that's why they named it Purl. I don't, is there a real answer to that question? Do we know?
There is probably an answer, but it's not one that I know.
Yeah, so if you look here and you see that bump, my yarn's dark blue, but if that were white, maybe it looked like a pearl to people. I mean, it is a different spelling, but Old English had different spellings anyway. I don't know, maybe we should look that up. So once you get all of your stitches onto your 20-inch long tail, you're just going to pull it really tight, and that's going to close up the top of that hat. And then what you want to do is you just want to make sure you're bringing them together very snugly. Okay, pull it together. And you might actually want to go through it one extra time, but you want to do this from the inside. So you're working with right sides together. So my knit stitches are going to be on the outside of this hat. So put right sides together. And just kind of go through and just pull it really tight, because you don't want, if it's too loose, then the top of that hat will work open and you'll end up with a hole on the top. Okay? And so for seaming, this is how I like to seam, and there are many ways of seaming. So I hold my pattern like my hat like this, with one side each, and I keep my finger there so I can kind of keep track of where I am. You want to kind of clip everything together, clip the bottom together, match it up nicely, and clip maybe the middle. And you can use clothespins or whatever you have. If you don't do this, sometimes you're sewing along and everything's happy, you're having a delightful day, but when you get to the end of your seam, it's like, how come one is shorter than the other one? It's because knitted fabric is stretchy and sometimes you might stretch one side. So if you clip them together, that really helps. You can stop and check halfway through and make sure you're not doing that. Okay, so for seaming, we're going to identify these stitches right on the edge. These look like knit stitches because they're shaped like V's and because they're definitely not purl stitches, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under each stitch. I'm going to pick up just 2 strands of yarn, and then I'm going to go on the other side and pick up 2 strands of yarn and pull it through. And I don't want to pull it too tight. I'm going to find that same stitch, the next one up, pick up just 2 strands of yarn, go across, pick up 2 strands of yarn. Okay, that is the running stitch. Any questions about the running stitch?
Well, we've got some quick Googlers who answered our Pearl question in the chat
Oh,
here, but it seems to
yay.
me there's a couple different explanations, so
Oh, what are
it
they?
might still be a little murky. Yes.
Anyone, any good ones worth talking about?
Um, One is Pearl is the word we use for the second foundation state in knitting, and it dates back to the 1300s. By the early 1500s, the word pearl referred to a particular kind of lace work done as an edging. Someone gave a link to a website that explains it. And then another explanation is that pearl is from an obsolete Scots word, purl, P-I-R-L, meaning twist.
Oh,
So take your pick.
take your pick. Or you can make up an answer like I did. So this I'm doing now is the whip stitch. So with the whip stitch, you jump over and you're always entering the stitch, always entering the fabric from the same side. I kind of split my yarn there. And you can decide which stitch you like better. So I exited my fabric on this side. I'm going to jump over and always entering and exiting the fabric from the same side. It's the whip stitch. So you just pick whichever one you like better and make your decision. I like the running stitch better. I feel like it gives me a better seam. Other knitters will swear that the whip stitch is better. You know, live your life, make your decisions and live your life accordingly. Live your best life with your best seam. Any questions? And you can see I'm taking this out. It's very easy to take out. If you do a seam and it's not good, you can take it out and try again. You don't have to worry about ruining your fabric. Knitted fabric is very forgiving. So you can take the seam out and try it again. And if your fabric starts to look a little ragged on the edges because you've fussed with it, if you just get it wet or steam it a little bit, it usually will bounce right back into shape. Any questions?
Oh, someone wants to know if you could add a pom-pom to the top of this hat. I think that would be very cute.
Okay, so here is the hat. I remade this hat, same hat, but I did extra long ribbing. And so I followed the same directions. I just did extra long ribbing because I like a little extra ribbing. So I did my ribbings 3.5 inches. And then from the very top of the hat to the bottom is 10 inches instead of 9. So I just added an inch, which makes it more slouchy. And then I like a great big fluffy pom-pom. So I added this great big fluffy pom-pom. So you could decorate the hat and you could sew buttons on it. You could put a fur trim on it. You can do anything you like. Any ideas you have are great. Anything else? Any other questions? How are we doing?
Well, I'll go ahead and put the handout in the chat here just in case anybody else needs that again. And then remind everyone that if you're not already signed up, we hope you can join us next Monday for Knitting 103, where you'll learn how to make the mittens to complete your set of winter accessories here. And then I did see someone asked about a class on fixing mistakes. That's the last class in this series, Knitting 104. And then after you've gotten through all of that, say you want another challenge or something, you can join us at the end of March for one of our premium classes. That's going to be a smaller class, a little bit more in-depth focus and time for more back and forth questions. And that is going to be on the Checkmate sweater, which has a cute little Fair Isle design at the top with chess pieces, of course. I don't think that's up on the Michaels website to sign up for yet, but that's going to be on March 28th at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, and if you do, as you're practicing, and I do encourage everyone to practice, you'll probably run into questions. If you have any questions going forward, you can feel free to contact me on Instagram. My Instagram name is Mr. Woolly Bear. It's M-I-S-T-E-R spelled out, and then Woolly Bear. Maybe Claire will put it in the chat. Or if you contact me on Facebook, it's just my name spelled just the way it is, and my picture's there, so you'll see me. Just send me a direct message with whatever questions you have, and I can usually answer them pretty quick. I hardly ever get any questions, so I don't mind, honestly. If you have questions or need help, just let me know. And if you make anything and post pictures online, I'd love it if you tag me in it so I can see what you make. So it's really exciting to see what people come up with. Any other questions at all? Anything else?
I think we probably forgot to mention, as much as we normally do, that this class was recorded. So if you do need to go back and watch it again and pause and rewind, it'll be posted on the Michael's YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. And then if you wanted to sign up for the Knitting 103 or Knitting 104 classes, those are going to be at the same time as this class. So that'll be 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central.
And then next week, learn how to do these mittens. And it's not, I know they do look very hard and people do feel intimidated, but I promise once we get into the class, you're going to realize that you can do these. And it's the next step in your knitting. So, all right. Thanks for coming to class. Don't forget to practice.